Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGig webinar series, our endeavor to impart techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is Leading Agile Transformation, and this is the 18th session in the Project Management Leadership series. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Rahul Sodame, Director of Engineering and Agile Practices Head at Vici Solutions Private Limited. He is also the Vice President Corporate Relations of PMI Pune Deccan India Chapter. Rahul is a senior management professional and agile expert. He is a proven leader and project program manager in the IT industry. He is a PMI Agile certified practitioner, a certified Scrum Master, certified Scrum Professional, project management professional, and ITIL Foundation certified. He is also certified by PMI as Leadership Institute Masters Class, that is LIMC. He is also involved in developing Agile awareness as chapter engagement representative for PMI Agile Community of Practice. Rahul was instrumental in published Agile's special edition of On Target magazine of PMI Pune chapter. He has participated and contributed in many Agile conferences in India. Rahul has been involved in successfully establishing Agile Scrum practices in multiple organizations from scratch since 2006. It involves assessment of Agile readiness, developing and executing plan for Agile adoption, and periodic reviews of successful Agile implementation. He is currently managing multiple global teams practicing Agile Scrum, and he works on continuous process improvement of Agile environment. He has conducted many corporate open workshops and seminars for Agile Scrum processes and certifications successfully. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker. Over to you, Rahul.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are able to see the screen being shared. And thank you for attending today's webinar. It is a pleasure interacting with all of you and sharing my experiences. So our objective today is to learn about what are the challenges typically, or how the process of Agile adoption starts in any organization. It will start with some kind of initial uncertainty. Then the organization should identify an Agile rollout strategy. We'll also be talking about what are the challenges in Agile implementation, the issues you will face. We'll also talk about some of the implementation reviews, how you should do your implementation reviews, how you should ensure that we are following Agile in a proper manner. We'll also talk about some of the best practices and lessons learned in Agile environment. And we'll also talk about what are the characteristics of a good Agile leader. So that's also an important aspect. And from leader, we are considering anyone who is involved in influencing the Agile environment. It could be a Scrum Master, it could be a project manager, program manager, or anyone from the senior management or executive council. So let's get started. Typically, for any organization, the Agile adoption will start with some kind of suspicion. It will start with some kind of environment where people will not be sure, is it right? Is Agile, first of all, something concrete methodology, or is it just a fad? Many people will say that, hey, we have been delivering projects for many years. What is it different? How is Agile different than any of the other methodologies? Some people might think that Agile is only relevant for new project developments. It may not work for us. We have a lot of maintenance projects. We have a lot of infrastructure projects, or only testing projects. Probably this is not for us. Some people might say, we are having multiple teams in multiple locations. So is it going to work for us? And some people might say that some of the things that Agile mentions, it's impossible to meet. How can you have co-located teams? We have our product owners or product managers sit in US. Our customers are in US, UK, Europe, multiple places. So how can we have all of them sitting together at one single location? It just doesn't seem possible. So it will always start with some kind of uncertainty in mind. But believe me, Agile is not definitely a fad. Agile has been in use and many organizations are using Agile, are moving to Agile. you will see that gradually the Agile adoption is increasing day by day. And it started with different philosophies, with Agile Manifesto getting signed in 2001. A lot of Agile methodologies have merged, and the common elements of those methodologies have been identified. And since then, the Agile momentum has gained a lot of speed. It has been widely adopted across multiple organizations. The next question that many of the team members might ask, okay, we understand Agile might have something useful since other organizations are adopting it, since the industries is going for it, might have something meaningful. But is it right for our organization? We have been doing deliveries and things have been working for us. So why do we want to change? Why do we want to go to a new methodology now? Some people might say that, hey, our needs are different, our environment is different. We have our own processes. And many organizations typically would create their own processes. They would tailor processes for the organization's need. They'll make sure that some kind of changes are being made, or their own processes, their own templates, own way of doing things are identified. And in this case, someone might say that, hey, when we already have our own processes and policies, quality policy, development policy, everything is set, why do we want to change it? Is it going to really work? Some people might say that, hey, we are a very highly process-oriented organization. We are a CMMS certified organization. We cannot skip processes. And if Agile says less documentation, if it says less design, that's not going to work for us. Because for our contractual obligations, for our audit process, we definitely need signed off requirements. We need signed off project plan. My auditor is going to come and ask me that, show me where are your signed off requirement specifications? Where are signed off design documentation? Where is signed testing plan? And if this is not going to get an importance in Agile environment, is it the right thing for me to do? Is it something I want to get into it? Probably I might have a lot of issues in my audit if I go to this. Some people might also say that we have multi-location teams. We have people who are spread across different locations, and it may not work for us. There are people spread across different geographies. How is it going to work with us? So it will always start with a lot of these uncertainties, a lot of these questions. And if you are involved in establishing Agile in your organization, you will have to deal with those questions. You will also have to first make sure that people understand what is Agile. People understand the true meaning of Agile, and some of the myths, some of the things that they have heard as rumors are eliminated, and people really understand the true picture of Agile. So for that, what you need to do is to really understand what is Agile. And for that, any organization who wants to follow Agile, who wants to implement Agile, definitely needs to make sure that they understand what is Agile Manifesto. And what are the principles behind Agile Manifesto? Why this Agile movement is coming into place in the first place? So that's something that is important to understand. It is not just enough to understand the implementation part of it, the process part of it, the methodology part of it, but it is equally important to understand why Agile methodologies are coming into place. And it will also help us to understand why Agile is getting prominence day by day. So for that, we really need to understand what is Agile Manifesto. Agile Manifesto says that working software is more important than just following the comprehensive documentation. It says individuals and interactions are definitely important than just following the processes and tools. Customer communication, customer collaboration is important than just a contract negotiation. And responding to change is important over following the plan. So it is not saying that the items that are mentioned on the right are not important, but what it is trying to say is the items that are that are on the left are definitely prominent, and those are the ones that contribute to your project success. What it says is we need to have a documentation, but what we need to have is a working software. A working software is a primary measure of progress. If I'm interested in knowing how my project is going on, where am I currently, then looking at 200 pages documentation, a user guide, online help, or any kind of documentation is not something as a unit of measure of where my project is or how my progress is, if I actually get to see the project working, maybe a few screens, maybe a few modules that are currently working, that is something that will give you more confidence of where we are on the project rather than just looking at the documentation of those areas. Individuals and interactions play a definitely important role, and we need to value individuals, we need to value interactions, not only with external customers, but with our internal customers and with various sub-teams that are involved in the project. And the processes and tools should support that and should not become a bottleneck in that. We need to have customer collaboration. We definitely need to work with our customers as our extended partners. We should not limit our discussions to the contract. So there might be different kinds of contracts which have contractual obligations. What is more important is we want to work with our customers as if he's our partner. So that is our more focus. That is what we want to make sure that happens. Responding to changes is important. Many times we create a very detailed project plan and we sign off on that project plan. And any changes to that, we are typically resistant to it. We might say that this is a change, this was not in the original signed off plan. So any change would require a change request. And the change request will go through its approval process, and only after approval we'll take that. But that's not what the customer might be looking for. His business environment is changing, dynamics are getting added, and he wants changes to happen in our plan as the environment is changing. So it's important to understand that the focus needs to be given on the right things. The next is we need to understand what are the principles behind this Agile Manifesto. And there are 12 principles which you can see at the agilemanifesto.org. And it is equally important to understand the principles, why these manifesto items have been identified. And that will help us to understand Agile in a true sense. So some of the principles are mentioned here. So our highest priority is to satisfy the customer with early and continuous delivery of valuable software. So our focus is giving him early and continuous delivery, giving him small and incremental pieces. We welcome changing requirements, even late in development. We are not frozen for our plan or our requirement specification once and for all. Delivering working software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months is really preferred. A shorter time scale is always preferred. And working software is a primary measure of progress. So that is the thing based on which we are going to identify, are we making progress, are we moving ahead or not. So it is important for your team, for you, and if you are a leader, if you are a manager, if you are a Scrum Master, then it is equally important for you to understand these principles and Agile Manifesto yourself. Also make sure that your team understands these principles. Your team understands this core value of Agile, and then they are implementing that in the true sense. It is also important to understand that Agile is an umbrella term of methodologies, and when we say Agile, it has multiple sets of methodologies, and any organization that follows the methodologies, any organization that follows the principles can be categorized under Agile environment. So Scrum is one of the methodologies, extreme programming, Crystal, feature-driven development, AUP, DSDM, Lean, and cowboy coding, which means doing development in a very random manner, haphazard manner, but deliver things quickly. So any of these methodologies become a part of Agile environment. It is important also to understand what are the differences between these methodologies, and when you actually are in a position where you want to roll out Agile to your organization, you will have to decide which of these methodologies are you going to use. Are you going to use Scrum? Are you going to use extreme programming? Or are you going to use Lean? Because all of these methodologies follow the same Agile principles, but they have their own implementation level differences as well. So that is something you need to understand, the core philosophy. So anyone saying Agile methodology might actually mean implementing one of these methodologies that are mentioned or listed here. So as far as distribution or usage of these methodologies is concerned, Scrum or Scrum and extreme programming is widely used across multiple organizations, and there are multiple other organizations using many other methods like Kanban, Lean, XP, and many other models. So while deciding your organization's agile transformation, you will also have to be mindful of these methodologies, the usage of these methodologies, and relevance of these methodologies to your environment, because that is what you will have to align it to and then follow that methodology in your organization. When it comes to identifying the impact of Agile, you will see that a survey was conducted by version 1 and a question was asked, are you planning to use Agile? Are you planning to move to Agile? And 59% respondents said that yes, we want to move to Agile environment. So that means it's not just a fad, it's not just a thought process that some of the organizations are having. Many organizations are really moving towards Agile. They are really considering to have their environment being implemented in Agile manner. What are the impacts to timelines? 64% people said that Agile is making their development time frame faster. And this is a statistics of people who have already started following it to some extent. And what they observed is, when I follow Agile in a true sense, our development time is going to be faster. We are going to deliver it sooner. We are going to have it multiple iterations which are of smaller duration. So it is having direct impact and direct benefits to the organization as well. So if you are convinced with transitioning to Agile, if you are convinced, if your organization really wants to go to an Agile environment, what you will have to do is you will have to make sure that you are developing a business case for Agile adoption, for Agile transition. And what all things you can do for that? You can first identify what are the project benefits, how the projects will benefit because of the Agile environment. Of course, you will benefit because of the shorter cycles. You will get customer feedback frequently. So if there are any changes to be done, you will get to know about those changes sooner than getting them at a later cycle where the project is completely ready. Your customers would also be benefiting out of it. Your customers would have a high visibility. They will know how the project is shaping up. They would be able to test some of the aspects sooner. They'll be able to visualize how the things are coming up. And if they want any changes to happen, the organization, the implementation team would be responsive to these changes. So that's a benefit to the customer. What are the business benefits? Business benefits is higher customer satisfaction, because your customer is happy, his change requests, his inputs are getting factored in, and of course the quality is going to improve because of that. The timelines are going to improve because of that. So that's going to have a direct benefits from the business perspective. So when you identify these benefits, you can also identify what is the investment required. So it is important to understand that Agile adoption, Agile rollout cannot come for free. You might need to make changes to your team's structure. You might need to make changes to your team's sitting arrangements. You might have to make changes to the tools that the team is using. You might need to make some of the additional tools available to your teams, and that might require some kind of investment. So you'll have to make sure that those investments are also factored in. And the next legitimate question is going to be that, okay, this is the investment. What is the return on these investment? So the initial 3 points will help to identify what is going to be your tangible return once you make an investment in the Agile environment. And once you have a business case presented and approved by your senior management, by your customers, then basically the next logical thing that you have to work on is to do a pilot, is to pilot Agile on one of the teams. Identify a smaller team to start with, a team that is ready to experiment, a team that is ready to understand that there could be a lot of things that are in the fragile manner, a lot of things that are not very clearly defined, a lot of things not mapped to the organization's environment. So there could be a lot of things in hazy state. So make sure that you identify team members who are ready to work in this kind of environment. You need to provide all the required training, tools and support to these teams. It is very important that the teams actually get trained on Agile, they understand what is Agile, and they follow it in a true sense. They would need some tools, so you'll have to make sure that you are making those tools available to those team members. And we need to provide a constant support to the team, so that if they are struggling with the initial adoption, if they want any changes to happen, then the management is always available to help them. The next thing is, we need to ensure that the team understands the methodology and is following it correctly. So there could be various things that can be done to understand the methodology. We'll touch base on that as we go forward. And we also need to help the team to understand the rationale behind some of the recommendations. So like not only it's important to understand how to follow Scrum, but it is also important to understand what is Agile, what is Agile Manifesto, what are the Agile principles because of which this manifesto came into place. So it is important to understand the rationale and follow it in a proper manner. We also need to review the feedback from the team periodically. Okay, we have started implementation, but how is it going? Is it working? Are we struggling? Can we make any changes to make it work? And then we need to take the appropriate steps so that we make it happen. The next phase, when your Agile pilot is successful, the next thing that you would like to do is to identify a rollout plan, an Agile rollout strategy for any organization. And any organization that wants to go for Agile should definitely make sure that a very concrete plan is identified and then put into action. So the first logical thing would be to conduct a training for the team. So some of the things that you can think of doing is have a book club, have some of the books on Agile where different team members read those books and then they come with their thoughts, what they have understood from those chapters, and they share it with their team. And the team can actually have a brainstorming on that. They can agree to some of the aspects, they can say that some of the aspects do not make sense to our environment, or there can be a debate on that. So this could be an initial trigger where we actually inculcate an environment where people come forward, share their thoughts, and there is some kind of discussion forum where people think of how to make it happen or how is it applicable to our environment, and they understand it in a proper manner. You can also think of having internal or external coaching where some Agile experts would come with you, join you and tell you how to roll it out in a best possible manner. You can also think of having team members undergoing through some kind of certifications. It could be PMI's Agile Certified Practitioner, it could be Certified Scrum Master, it could be Certified Scrum Professional, or any of the other certifications. That will also help the team to understand the methodologies and to understand the true and core part of the framework. The next thing that you will have to do when you plan to roll out Agile is to evaluate and identify tools. And we'll talk more about the tools later, but you will have to identify which tools are we going to use for task management, which tools will be used for project management, what are the tools that we are going to use for continuous integration, what are the tools that we are going to use for our coding or unit testing or code reviews. So we need to identify those tools, and a lot of new tools would come into picture when you roll out to Agile, and you will have to understand what is the development language, the programming language used, and then in relations to that, what tools make sense to your environment. The next is you will have to identify which Agile methodology are you going to use. Are you going to use XP? Are you going to use Scrum or any other methodology? The next, of course, is you need to create an internal external buy-in, because it is not only important that your development team or your QA team is ready to implement Agile, but your senior management also needs to be equally supportive. Your customers also need to be equally supportive. Your Agile is not going to be successful if the customers are not working with you in the equal manner. The next is you need to implement a change management, because shifting to Agile is going to be a big change for many people. You will have to create buy-in, you will have to roll out a lot of change management processes, do a lot of initiatives through which people will be adaptive to this and they will feel comfortable in moving on to Agile. Another thing that you should consider is having an internal Agile Center of Excellence. What this would mean is a set of Agile experts who would monitor the Agile usage across different projects, and they'll try to check, are we following Agile in a correct manner? Are there any gaps? Or are there any loopholes? Or are there any things that are happening which are not supposed to be happening in Agile environment? So there should be some mechanism through which we will be reviewing our implementation. And of course, Agile says that we should be doing continuously inspect and adapt. Inspect how we are implementing Agile and see how we are going to adapt to new changes, make new changes as we go along. The next aspect, or the first aspect of the rollout, is to understand Agile in a true sense. And understanding Agile has various facets to us, which we'll go through now. Typically, we focus on the triple constraints, which are focusing only on the schedule, cost, and scope. So that is something that we focus on. When we want to roll out to Agile environment, our major focus is on the value that is getting generated out of this project. We want to make sure that the value is definitely being given to our customer, and the value is given to our customers as well. So how is it contributing to revenue generation? How is it contributing to cost reduction? So this is called as extrinsic value. And we also need to understand the quality aspect of it, because while we are focusing on schedule, cost, and scope, we cannot miss on quality. We need to ensure that we are focusing on quality equally. So that is why you will see that in this Agile triangle, there is a significant focus on the value that is being generated through the project, and a focus on quality as well. And of course, triple constraints will be part of your project. But we need to ensure that we are not working only on triple constraints and forgetting about the value of the project and the quality of the project. The next concept to understand, and this is to understand why some of the recommendations of Agile have came into place at all. We hear about Agile, we hear team co-location. But why this team co-location recommendation has come into place at all? To understand that, this channel of communications or richness of communication effectiveness would be important to understand. As you can see here, there are some ways of communication which are documented way of communication. We can use paper, and we can use audio tape to convey our message. We can use email conversations, or we can use a video tape to convey the message that we want to share. But all these modes are offline communication modes, where you will send the information and it will reach to that person at a different point of time. So richness of effectiveness would certainly be less than if it is a real-time interaction. So the better way of communication is, of course, a telephonic conversation. If you can have a video conversation, it is more effective, where you can see the person, see the facial expressions, see the body language. If you can have a face-to-face conversation, that is even more effective, because both of you are sitting next to each other and discussing. And if you are using even a whiteboard while we are doing face-to-face communication, so your face-to-face verbal communication is complemented with whiteboard, where you draw the diagrams, your expectations, your thoughts. That will even help people to understand what you're trying to say, and they will be able to remember it more effectively. So this is one of the aspects of why we want the teams to be sitting together, the teams to be sitting next to each other as much as possible. Because this, if they are face-to-face conversation, it's going to be definitely effective than if they are just communicating through emails. The next important aspect is team co-location or team movement. So one of the background of this concept was from a diagram called as Agile Spaghetti diagram. And this particular diagram actually is used to depict what is the movement of any item, or you can think of movement of any information, or how much a person has to travel to get his work done. So let's say if you have to meet your manager, do you have to travel 2 floors and then talk with him? You have to go and interact with your QA team member. Do you really have to go too long, or it's in a separate building? Then you may not prefer to go to that building and talk with him. You might just call him up, or you might write him an email. So that means there's too much flow that needs to happen, too much movement that needs to happen. And if there is too much movement, people are going to be reluctant to do that. If there is something that is next to them, then they would use it. If I have to pass on some message, if the person is sitting next to me, I can just turn my chair and talk with him. But if I really have to go to a different building and talk with him, I might, instead of that, send him an email and just do away with that. So our communication, our effectiveness is more if the team members are sitting together, if they are co-located. And that is one of the reasons why co-location is really emphasized in Agile. And while you are doing transition, if you want your Agile transition to be effective, you need to understand that you are actually trying to understand some of these reasons as well. You not only are just following it for the sake of following it, but you understand why this team co-location is being recommended in the first place. And once you understand some of the things that you will have to ensure, that try to get your different team members sitting co-located as much as possible, including your Scrum Masters, product owners, actual customer or proxy customer. If your business analyst or a product owner is playing the role of a proxy customer, then let's see if he can be seated next to the team. Your development team, your QA team members, if they are sitting together, then the collaboration is definitely going to be more effective. Provide all the infrastructure and support for the team so that collaboration is more effective. We should provide enough walls and white spaces so people can collaborate with each other. We should have a dedicated space for stand-ups. If you are following extreme programming, you might be following pair programming. So having a dedicated space for pair programming lab might be a good idea, where team members can go to that pair programming lab, do some brainstorming, do design discussions, and then get back to their work again. We also need to make sure that we are reducing distractions, making the space pleasant, where team members feel comfortable talking with each other. The next aspect that we need to consider while we are rolling out Agile is the tools that we are going to use. And there would be several tools that will get added once we start following Agile. We need, the team members might want to have automated build mechanism. The team would like to have a continuous integration mechanism where whatever code changes are being developed, the continuous integration environment will pick up those changes, will create a build, will deploy those builds, and will execute some kind of testing on that. We also need to identify what tool are we going to use for project management, for task management. And of course, if you have remote teams, then having a team which will support online collaboration is more effective than having a physical task board. You'll also have to think about, are we going to do automation testing? Are we going to do acceptance testing in automated manner? If yes, then what is our programming language and what kind of automated testing tools are we going to use? We'll also have to see how are we going to do configuration management. And we'll also have to think about how are we going to do our static code analysis, dynamic code analysis, code quality evaluation. And this is actually going to impact the quality improvement that you would expect out of Agile environment. So if you are expecting Agile to improve your delivery timelines, to improve your quality, then you'll also have to make sure that all these tools are in place and they are used in the most effective manner. The next part is about Agile modeling. And this is again slightly different than the way we conventionally do the modeling or design, where what we try to do is we have a full requirement specifications with us. And when we do a design, we do a low-level design and high-level design, and we try to go as deep as possible and figure out each and every aspect of it. Now, the flip side of that is if your implementation changes, then your design also changes. But your design documentations may or may not change. You might not go back and reflect the changes in your design docs, so they might become stale. Instead of that, what Agile says, and it's very much in line with the Agile Manifesto, how much documentation should we do? How much design should we do? The answer is just barely good enough. The amount of design that is required for a set of requirements that you are working on, we should do that. Agile never says that you should not do design, but do whatever is good enough. And then, of course, we can apply a lot of effective ways for the Agile environment, which is test-driven development, then architecture envisioning. Then keep on doing documentation continuously. As and when some of the new functionality pieces are developed, create documentation only for those smaller modules. Then try to get stakeholder participation. Make sure you have a couple of models. So what you would typically might want to do is create a couple of architectures or a couple of design approaches. And then you can identify one of the approaches and go and start implementing that. You might also have to do some kind of rework in the process. But since you are actually trying to do inspect and adapt, you would have already learned few things and then you are trying to follow it. So that would work well with the Agile environment. So you also need to ensure that your designing, your estimation is also in the Agile manner. Your planning is also in the Agile manner. The next part is Agile Metrics. And when you roll out to an Agile environment, you will have to identify which of these matrices are you going to use to check are you on track or not. So one of the Agile metrics is velocity, which reflects how much work is getting done per iteration, how much story points are getting developed per sprint if you're using Scrum model. We can have a story point based burn down, which will tell us are we on track or not. We can have a task or hourly burn down, which again can tell us are we going to complete all the tasks that we have signed up for a particular iteration. We can also have story point based matrices. So if you still want to do earned value management in Agile, you can do that, but based on the story points. You can definitely have your test case point based matrices or any of the ways you're currently doing your QA matrices. The unit of measurement would be in story points or Agile estimation base. That would be a difference, but other principles definitely remain same. You can also use lead time or cycle time, which would tell us how much time are we going to take to deliver between two successive user stories. That will also give you some inputs on how are you delivering, or are you on track, are you going to meet your deadlines or not. Now when you start following Agile, you're going to meet a lot of challenges, and it is important to understand these challenges and to have a strategy to deal with them. So one of the challenges you would see when you start following Agile is, what is the role of a project manager in Agile environments? If you go and talk about Scrum model, it talks about product owner, it talks about team, and it talks about Scrum master. It doesn't talk about project manager as a dedicated role. So what happens to project manager? And you will feel these kind of challenges when you are actually following Agile, and you will having Scrum master who is going to do day-to-day task management, task assignments. Then what is the project manager going to do? So some of the recommendations for a project manager that the changes that he will have to do for himself is, he needs to make sure that he is not dictating the estimate. He is not doing the task assignments. Typically in waterfall environment, project managers might do the estimations on behalf of the team. He might make commitments on behalf of the team. That's not something that you want to do here. You'll have to work with your Scrum masters and make sure that he's successful. If there are any impediments, you're helping him to resolve that. You're trying to empower your team, and you will have to provide coaching and mentoring to the team. You'll have to make sure that the team is really progressing and being successful. You will have to be involved in the release planning and to make sure that overall progress is happening. But what is something that you should not do is command and control mechanism, because you want to empower your team. The next challenge you will see is, what is the role of a Scrum Master? Is Scrum Master a technical lead of the team? Is Scrum Master a manager of the team? Or is Scrum Master a product owner of the team? There would be a lot of clashes, there will be a lot of uncertainty that will happen when you try to roll out Agile environment. So Scrum Master should definitely make sure that he helps the team for removing impediments, he protects the team, he makes sure that the team is using Scrum in a proper manner, but he should not overrule the team members. One of the other challenges that you would face is what tools to use. Which tools are we going to use to track the progress? Are we going to use any online collaboration tools, or are we going to use Excel, or are we going to do it in any other manners? How are we going to use reports? Because in Agile we expect some kind of reports like burn down chart, burn up chart, velocity charts. The tool should help us to generate that. Because otherwise it is going to be very difficult for us to create these tools ourselves or these reports ourselves. How are we going to ensure that the remote teams, that they are physically not present, but they still see the progress that is being made, still know where we are? Are we going to make it from the release time frame or not? What tools should be used for continuous integration, for test-driven development? Are we going to use any free tools, or are we going to pay for them? So a lot of these things need to be factored in before you actually roll out to Agile, so that your Agile adoption would be smooth and you would have less hiccups while you go along. Some of the other challenges that you will see are related with the distributed teams. You will have multiple teams spread across different locations. So how to ensure that there's a collaboration happening between these team members, and even though they are geographically spread across, even though they have into different time zones, they're still working with each other. There could be a lot of dependencies between the teams, and that could become a bottleneck. How to ensure that different teams follow the right processes and in the cohesive manner. How to make sure that they have visibility of what other team is doing. Do you want to have a common backlog across multiple teams, or each team having their separate backlog that they are working on? How to bring different people from different teams or even sub-organizations work together. These are some of the challenges that you will be facing with the distributed teams. Some of the other challenges would be how to make agile work and still have risk management done. How to make sure that we are into agile model but we are still doing design. How to make sure that documentation is still happening and we are not skipping that. How to make sure that we follow our CMMI assessment and still do it in an agile manner. How to handle it if we are already contractually obligated for a fixed price, fixed duration project. Does it really work in that case? How do we handle it there? What if there are a lot of compliance issues that we have to deal with? What if there are control limits within which the project has to operate? And how are you going to handle maintenance projects, tech support projects, where the work for the next iteration cannot be planned? Things might suddenly come up and there could be priority one issue coming up which I cannot project or I cannot understand in my current iteration. So how to deal with these? A lot of these challenges you will face, and we'll talk about some of the best practices to deal with them. But this is something you'll have to be mindful of, and if you consider them and then roll out Agile, it's definitely going to be more successful than otherwise. One of the other things that you should do is, once let's say you have started following Agile now you are applying Agile, you are doing your daily stand-up meetings, your sprint planning, sprint retro. Something that you should do periodically is to check yourself. Are we on track? Are we following Agile in a correct manner? So something that you might want to do is do an agility assessment for your teams. Are we doing it in a proper manner? Are there any gaps? Are we missing something? How to explore? You can also think of having some professional consultants or coaches work with you and identify if there are any gaps, if you are not following in a best possible manner or there is any scope for improvement. You should also see that there is no downward hill observed, which means people's interest is going down or the benefit that you would have expected is not getting realized. And you should also be careful about any dysfunctional symptoms or failure modes. And we'll talk about some of these failure modes. This is something that you should be careful about. Is it the case that the senior management is not fully sold on Agile, or they are saying that you guys go and implement Agile but don't ask us when it comes anything from our side? Is it the case that the organization's culture itself is not really supporting the change, because transitioning to an Agile is a major change and the organization should definitely support that. It could also happen that either the retrospective meetings are not happening at all, or if they are happening, they are not effective. Nothing concrete comes out of it, or nothing gets implemented after they are done. The next is team members are really pressurized because it's Agile. They want to develop things one after the other, and in that rush, they just make changes very randomly, and the quality gets impacted because of that. Another issue could be that the planning is not effective. The release planning, the iteration planning is not really happening in the manner in which it should. The changes in requirements are still happening in the middle of the iteration, and your product owner or your Scrum Master are not controlling that. Then this is definitely one of the failure modes. Some of these things, if they are present in your projects, you definitely need to work on them immediately and try to fix them before it becomes a failure mode for your project. And some of the other issues could be that you're still seeing status reports being floated around. So your environment is not really transitioned to Agile. Some of the other issues or failure modes that you can see is there are multiple product owners, or the product owners are not available, or they are too busy. They're working with customers and they are not available for you to review a product prioritized list or even create a product backlog in the first place. If the Scrum Master or your project manager is using command and control style, then definitely you're not going to build a very cohesive and self-managing teams. You might, if you're seeing teams are still following development team versus QA team versus documentation team, and they're not working together as one single cohesive team, then this is definitely one of the Agile failure modes. If you see that technical debt is continuously accumulating, the definition of done, when to call a story as completed, if that is not clear, that could be one of the issues. And if a lot of these issues keep accumulating, then the team might feel of going back to the old ways where it was working, or whatever ways they were doing earlier. So you should be definitely watchful of these failure modes and should ensure what are you going to do to not get into that mode. One of the things that you can do is to identify what is the waste. In our entire process, what are the places where a lot of time is getting wasted? as in this example, if you see, there are some places where it is taking more time, and because of which the entire delivery is getting delayed. If you have any such waste in your projects, then you should identify them. Some of the wastes in software development are mentioned over here. If you are having a partially done work, then that's a waste, because you might keep working on it again and again. If you are giving extra features than really required, that's a waste. If you have to do continuously relearning, or there's too much time happening on handoffs between dev and QA to build engineer team. There are a lot of delays inherent in your team. Team has to do a lot of task switching, or there are too many defects. Any of these could become waste in your software development, and they are going to eat up more time in your entire cycle. So you should be watchful of those. You should also be watchful of agile hype cycle. So what that means is, initially there'll be a lot of excitement to go for agile. People would have reached to a peak of inflated expectations. But over a period of time, people might be having a lot of disillusionment. They might have a lot of, they might feel that, hey, this is not what we expected. Our productivity is not getting doubled. Our outcome is not getting doubled. So we still have a lot of issues coming up. And once you actually handle this particular phase effectively, then you can enlighten your team, and then you can get a plateau of productivity, where team now understands how to make it work. They have figured out how to map it to their environment, and then they are making it work. Some of the best practices to make agile work is, first is you should do an implementation audit. Check whether teams are doing it properly. Are retros happening? Are planning happening? Are we doing stand-up in just 15 minutes only? You might also want to consider Best Agile Implementation Award. If you have multiple teams, then the team that effectively applies it might get rewarded. You can also identify some of the champions to look out. Are we applying processes in a correct manner? Are we applying technical aspects in a correct manner? And we applying quality aspects in a correct manner. So those champions can work across multiple teams to ensure that the expected things are being followed in the proper manner. You might also have to think about the impact of the appraisal criteria, because the team members working with their own heroic cannot help. The team has to contribute to the team. So everyone needs to understand that I am doing my work effectively is one aspect, but I need to make sure that my team is successful. So your appraisal criteria also needs to consider that aspect. You need to ensure that the retros are happening and they are contributing to continuous improvement. And you should also think of which agile matrices are you going to use and how are they going to contribute to the progress review. Some of the other best practices is you can ensure that if it is possible, if you can get all your stakeholders together, at least for a big meeting like a release planning meeting, wherein even your customers or your product owners are physically co-located with your team members and they are actually discussing the release planning together. This would be most effective, and we have seen the reasons why in-person collaboration discussions are more effective. We should have very clear and visible information radiators. So big visible task boards or burn down charts. Some of these will really help the team to understand how are we progressing. We should make sure that we are building into team relationship, because the team's relationship with each other is also one of the important aspects for making Agile successful. We need to have a very clear definition of done, when to call a story as complete, and we should continuously doing inspect and adapt mechanism. Build these empowered teams. We can empower teams for definitely getting the best outcome out of them. We should have team members of required roles like development, QA, documentation, build engineers, so that they can work together and make timely decisions. They don't have to wait for the other guys to come up and take the decisions. Teams members should own the project, and it is an important aspect in Agile that they take complete responsibility to deliver the product. And any interferences to the empowered teams, if someone else tries to dictate them, then that's not going to give us the empowered teams and the optimal outcome out of it, of course. How to build high-performing teams is, first of all, we need to identify right people who would work together with each other. We need to set high expectations. We need to build very committed teams and we need to empower them. We need to give them required responsibilities and authorities as well. We need to make sure that the team members have trust with each other. And we should also see that they work with a sustained pace. They're delivering things periodically. They're not stuck. We should also see that the teams are reflecting high velocity. The speed of development is increasing over a period of time. Now, what are the characteristics of an Agile leader? If you want to be an Agile leader, if you want to roll out Agile in your organization, you can do that in a capacity of a Scrum Master, a project manager, a senior manager, or a coach, or a mentor. You will need to build some of these characteristics. Only then you can be an effective Agile leader. One of the definite aspect is servant leadership, where you are giving priority to your team and what they are really looking forward, what kind of help they need. So servant leaders are people usually are humble and they are trying to help their team members. So many of the characteristics that are mentioned here are important. We need to build these characteristics instead of dictating the team, instead of overruling the team. We need to work as if we are trying to help the team. We want to work with the team and make them successful. In the same perspective, we need to have an adaptive leadership, where we are actually trying to work with the team, inspect our environment, adapt and build more. 4 key characteristics here is do less, speed to value, ensure that we have a focus on quality, and engage and inspire the team members, build a healthy relationship between the team. We also need to roll out or have a participatory decision model, where all the team members actually are involved in the decision-making process. This again is tied up with creating an empowered teams, where team members feel that they are also being heard when the decisions are taken. Their opinions also count. They can also come forward and share. They can also contribute. So this is the way in a participatory decision models you can hear from your team members and basically ensure that their views, their inputs are factored in. What are the behaviors for any effective leader? So the leader definitely needs to model the desired behavior. If you're saying that in Agile we need to have empowered team members, then you yourself should be empowering your team members, your leads, your managers. You should ensure that you are creating a common vision. All the team members understand what is the objective of this project. The team members understand how the project is critical, how it is important. And you should be willing to change the status quo, because transitioning to an Agile is also in a mindset rather than or processes. So it is important that people are ready to make those changes. We need to empower others as well as we need to encourage others feel comfortable in rolling out some of these changes. The leader also will have to use emotional intelligence. He will also have to make sure that he is actually aware of his emotional behavior, emotional symptoms, his own emotions, and using them effectively, or even understand the team members' emotions and then deal with them effectively. Because you want to make sure that the team members are all involved, they feel that they are being valued, and you need to make sure that they work together and work in an environment they are building an empowered team. You might also have to think of how are you going to, does your organization is your organization currently having an Agile coach along with the Scrum Master, or can one of your managers, senior managers, play a role of an Agile coach, where typically a Scrum Master would focus only on the Scrum aspect of it, but the Agile coach would focus on the agility of an organization and adoption of Agile. The mission for a Scrum Master might be to protect the team, to ensure that the impediments are removed, whereas the Agile coach would look at the gaps in your environment and how the process improvements can be done. The Scrum Master's involvement is limited to the project, but an Agile coach would work across the different projects, across the organization, and even with your senior management or customers as required. So Agile coach can play a very useful role to make sure that you are following Agile in a correct manner. And what are the characteristics of an Agile leader? There could be a manager who is focusing on day-to-day tasks, but a business leader would, let's say, focus on people and the business aspect of it. But an Agile leader would focus on the business value. Like an Agile triangle that we saw, he will have to think about what is the business value that we are deriving out of this project. Manager would typically use team control, the control mechanism, but the agile leader would like to empower the team. He would like to make sure that they work with each other and they do the things themselves. Manager might focus on specific practices. The business leader might focus on the principles behind those, and agile leader would definitely like to focus on what are the agile principles and practices. So of course, the agile leader will be doing the right things in the correct manner. And he will also make sure that we are focusing on the business value and continuous improvement. So that is a role that any agile leader will have to play in effective agile adoption. So that's something I wanted to share with all of you. And I also wanted to share with you that if you want to learn more about agile, you can use all different platforms like TechGig, like many of the other certifications or websites or platforms available. There is also another opportunity, which is Agile India 2013 conference, where PMI India is going to have a booth and they're going to provide a lot of information about Agile and certifications in various ways to learn about it, which is starting from tomorrow till 2nd of March. So that is what I wanted to cover in the session today, which talks about what is basically how to make sure that our organization wants to go for Agile, and once we decide to go for it, how do we ensure that we are applying it in a proper manner, and how do we get the most out of it, and what as a leader you will have to change, what characteristics you will have to build as a leader to make sure that your Agile adoption is really delivering the value that it is expected to. So now we will move on to some of the questions from our team members. Okay, one of the questions was that what Agile leadership or bullets are required in Agile Coach or Scrum Master, and the question was asked by Devesh Kumar. So as we discussed, it is important that the Scrum Master is actually working as a servant leader. Scrum Master is actually working to build these characters, to help the team empower themselves and follow Agile in a proper manner. So he will have to apply the servant leadership. He will have to make sure that he is not dictating on the team members, which will spoil the entire environment of being a empowered team. Okay, the next question asked by Devesh Kumar is, what is the criteria for recruiting Agile team members? It is important, as we have discussed, that Agile, rolling out an Agile, of course, the team members need to be supportive to that. The team members need to understand what are the benefits that we are going to get out of Agile, why we want to apply Agile, and what are the reasons, what are the principles behind that. So we definitely want people who are motivated people, people who would take up ownership, and people who would actually work on a lot of things independently. They will collaborate with other team members and make sure that the things are delivered. Because in this environment, you will have requirements or work assigned to you, which you will have to work with different team members and deliver it. It may not be possible where one manager is continuously tracking you on each and every task, and a lot of things you will have to drive yourself. So people having that drive and motivation is really an important criteria to bring them on board. Okay, the next question asked by Vinay Kalhota is, when scope is not fixed and we face a change to the scope, how do we accommodate the cost without a change request? So many of the organizations actually follow a model where any kind of change request raised, it is definitely identified as or goes through a formal change request process. There is a change control board that goes through each change request. Then it is given to engineering team to identify the impact of the change request, and then it is, of course, if it is approved based on the cost and the duration, then it gets implemented. Now that is not the formal process that we will follow here in case of Agile environment, where we have completed one iteration and we are about to start the next iteration. During that time frame, we are open to have the changes. Now what that means is if we are taking those changes, that is changing our scope. So we might have addition to the scope, or whatever implementation you have already done, that might get changed. So that is definitely going to impact your timelines. And when it impacts your timelines, it might impact your cost as well. So one of the things that we do is to use the tools effectively, which will tell you that how are we doing on the timelines perspective. If we are adding one more requirement at this point of time, then that means we are going to take, let's say, 4 days more, which means that now and of course what you do, another aspect in Agile is any new requirement gets added to the product backlog, and product manager has to do a prioritization of this requirement. If the product manager puts the new requirement on top of the backlog, then that is the requirement that you will sign up next. But in that case, you will also tell your product owner, product manager, that this is the extra cost of it. This is the extra time that I have to spend on it. And what that means is, if you are implementing that requirement, some of the lower priority requirements might be pushed out if your release date is firm, or if your release date is flexible, then you can accommodate some of the lower priority requirements and the date will be pushed accordingly. So it is definitely in consultation with your product owner. So your product owner can identify, do I want to increase my release date or do I want to reduce the scope? And based on that, the cost can be controlled. Okay, the question that Nitesh Nima has asked is, let's say you are following Agile and in between the client's design team had changed the framework and you were about to use that framework and now the entire framework itself has changed. So now my design changes and I have to do a lot of changes from my side as well. This kind of scenario does happen, and where Agile design or Agile modeling also says that you can do design what is really required for that particular project or that particular requirement. In that case, there is a scope for rework because changes can happen later on. There is also a possibility where your team is dependent on another team and that team has done something because of which now you have to incorporate additional changes. Now all the changes should be created as a separate requirement or defect or task. Most of the times the problem arises because all the changes are, what we try to do is there is a change happening, the US dependency has occurred, the framework has changed, and now we have to make changes in our side. So what happens because of that is, and most of the cases, the team, the project manager, the Scrum Masters, if they try to incorporate those changes as a part of same requirement, then your scope of the requirement is going to get inflated. And what that means is you will be expected to deliver the same requirement in the same time frame. Instead of that, the recommended approach is any change that is happening needs to be added as a new requirement. If it is a sizable rework, then it should be added as a new requirement. If it is not a sizable change, then it should be still added as a new task or a new defect. In either of the ways, it can be added to the backlog and the effort estimates can be given to that. Now we will go back to a product owner and we will tell him that these are the 3 new requirements or tasks that are added, and this is something we have to do because of the change, design changes that have happened. Now it is up to the product owner to make a decision. He will have to do reprioritization. So he will have to ensure that am I going to do this design rework, and if some of the architecture changes happened at the other side, you might have to go with it. You might not have an option to do that. So what that is something that you will take up in the upcoming sprint immediately. Now because of that, some of your other lower priority items can go out of your schedule, or if the timelines are flexible, you can actually extend your timelines. But that is the cost of the rework, and that is something you should work with your product owners and handle it accordingly. The next question which is asked by Ajay Somanal is, what kind of projects are not supposed to be using Agile? Okay, so typically for the projects which are where the development is a new project development, we can apply Agile end-to-end, where we create a release plan, where we create a sprint plan, and we try to work on them. Or wherever we can predict what is where we have a list of backlog and the backlog is prioritized and that can be taken up, can be definitely applied in Agile environment. But there are two kind of scenarios where you cannot predict what will come up next. The one where it is a maintenance project, or the other where it is a project which is a time and material basis, where you are not really sure what will come up next. You have actually planned for 10 tasks in sprint 2, and while you are in the middle of the sprint, suddenly new priority 1 defects have come up, or there are customer blocker defects have come up. You definitely will have to pick them up, and you will have to work on them and resolve them immediately, because you might have some kind of service level agreements, SLAs, with your customers. If your project is to only work on these kind of technical support projects or maintenance projects, then you might find that the Scrum model might be difficult, where what Scrum says is where you do a sprint planning and you plan everything that you are going to do in the next entire week or 2 weeks, and then do not change that during the iteration of the sprint. Now this might be difficult, but that does not mean that you cannot follow Agile in this environment. What some of the organizations have found interesting is, instead of using Scrum model, you can use Kanban model, where the Kanban works on a very straightforward philosophy of create a Kanban board, have a visibility of what tasks are to be done, and you will have 3 columns: not started, in progress, and completed. And as soon as some work comes up, you will put that up in the not started. You will, once you have started work, you will put that in the in progress mode, and once you are done, you will move it to the completed. And if there is a new work comes up, you can put it at the top of the not started place. So that way you can actually plan your work and still have the Agile principles followed. Okay, the next question asked by Shailesh Jaiswal is, what if frequent changes in requirements delays the delivery? So if it is happening that there are significant changes happening to the requirements, and there could be various reasons because of that, for that. Either your customer's business environment is changing, and because of which your customers is asking for changes, and the requirements really have to go undergo multiple rounds of changes. Or it could be because of your product owners are actually they have not prepared your product backlog with the details in it, and once you start implementing, they see the implementation, and once they see the implementation, they come up with new changes. Now if there are significant changes happening, then one of the recommendations would be to have your shorter duration sprints, because if your requirements are changing too frequently, then having a 1 month sprint or a 1 month iteration might not be effective, because you would have spent the whole month on developing some requirement, and end of the month the requirement might have changed and you might have to rework to a large extent. So to avoid that, it is recommended that if your frequency of changes is too high, then you should reduce your sprint duration, so that you can demonstrate whatever has been done in that particular sprint, get a feedback, make necessary changes, and incorporate in the next sprint immediately. And of course, one of the other aspects when it comes to the delivery date, if you use any tools effectively, some of the tools will actually tell you how are you doing from your release perspective. Like if you're delivering properly and your burn down chart is being reflected properly, you might see that, hey, you know, based on my current last week, I had planned for 20 tasks, but I could complete only 10 tasks. Now what that means is, now I am not able to complete the project on 15th of March. I will be able to complete the project by 20th of March. So if you use Agile Matrices properly, they will help you to project if you are on track or if you are going to miss the dates by how many dates. So some of these matrices would be a useful tool to work with your product owners and customers and tell them that this is the impact that we are seeing and how do we want to handle that. Do we want to still keep the release date same and reduce the scope, or we want to change the release date? So either of the ways you should be able to handle the delivery dates and the impact of that. So I think those were the questions we can take in the time frame that is available with us. I would like to thank all of you for joining this session, and I hope this provided some inputs to you and was of help to you. Thank you all.
Well, thanks so much for the insightful presentation, Mr. Rahul. I'm really thankful to you for conducting this webinar. It was indeed a great session. I would also like to thank all our participants for their support in making this webinar a success. The recording of this session would be available on techgeek.com by tomorrow. Thank you all. Have a great evening.